Welcome to the Support for PhD Applications webinar. My name is Grace Lammerman. I'm a second year PhD student at the University of Leeds and I study micropaleontology. I'm joined by 6 other PhD students and the Sense Earth Observation CDT Manager and the Panorama DTP Manager. I'm going to ask each of the PhD students to introduce their university they attend, application process they went through, and their area of research. So Amethyst, if I could start with yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Amethyst. I'm a PhD student at the University of Leeds in the NERC Panorama DTP. I'm studying the tropical cyclone boundary layer.
That's great, thank you. Heather, could I go with you next?
Yep, hi, I'm Heather. I'm also at the University of Leeds. I'm independently funded by the European Space Agency, partially by the University of Leeds and by an alumni donor. And I'm just starting my 3rd year of my PhD, and I use remote sensing to look at mainly Antarctica and seeing how fast it's flowing and how it's changing.
Dorothea?
Hi, my name is Dorothea. I'm a first year PhD student, just started at the British Antarctic Survey. I'm working on melt layers and ice cores, and I'm part of the Sea Clear DTP at the University of Cambridge.
Excellent, thank you. Sophie?
Hi, I'm Sophie, and I am at the National Oceanography Centre, but I'm part of the Sense CDT at the University of Leeds. And I study, I'm a PhD student first year, and I study the movement of sargassum, which is a large seaweed in the Caribbean Sea.
That's great, thank you. Lucy?
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a Sense first year student at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm going to be studying biomass change in the dry tropics using remote sensing.
Yeah, thank you. Anthony?
Hi, I'm a first year NERC Panorama PhD student at the University of Leeds, and I am working on the pheromonal basis of reproductive constraint in eusocial insects.
Great. And Ruth?
Hi, my name is Ruth Amy. So I'm the Sensor Manager for the Sense Earth Observation CDT, which is a PhD programme advertising PhDs at the moment. We have positions at Leeds and Edinburgh, NOC, National Oceanography Centre, and BAS, British Antarctic Survey. So I'll be monitoring the Q&A if you have any questions there, and I'll be around as well at the end for the open questions portion.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nigel?
I'm Nigel Richards, and I manage the Panorama DTP, which is a collaboration of 6 departments: the University of Leeds, the University of York, and the University of Hull.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll jump straight into the questions, and I'm going to ask for our panelists to answer if they have any tips on how you find a PhD. So Dorothea, if we start with you, do you have any specific tips?
Yeah, just getting unmuted. I personally found my PhD through a collaboration that I had with my supervisor prior to the PhD. I did my master's thesis with her, and that was definitely the starting point. We got on well. I really enjoyed her as a supervisor, which is crucial, I think. And I started to find interesting features in the work that I did, and that just got me to develop a project myself.
Excellent. I think most of us would agree PhD supervisors are a big part of the entry into PhD and the contact we have with them. Could I ask Heather how you came about finding your PhD?
Yep, so I searched for it online. How to find a PhD is a great website. There's a lot on there. There's a lot to sift through. But when I was initially looking, I wasn't 100% clear what I wanted to do it on. I knew I personally liked ice and Antarctica and remote sensing, but as what I would do with that, I wasn't sure. So I think I narrowed it down, and I had a list that I kept looking at, trying to figure it out. And I think I actually applied to like maybe 6 or 8 to start with, because I just didn't know. You don't know until you talk to the supervisor and stuff. And yeah, and then you narrow it down by talking to the supervisor. Always email the supervisor before you apply, so you get to know them and find out what the project is. But I think there's lots of resources online, and if you know particular people in the field that you might want to work with, it's a good idea to go look at their website as well, because they might have links to things like that.
Yeah, I think those are some really handy tips. Amethyst, can I ask how you came about yours with the NERC DTP?
Yeah, so I found mine on findaphd.com, as I'm sure a lot of people did. But to go through to find the project specifically, so Panorama DTP advertises, I think all of them on Find a PhD, but there's a link to the website, and the Panorama DTP lists all of their projects on there. So I kind of moved over to that over time, and would just keep checking that, just keep going to the atmospheric and seeing if there were any new ones, because that gets updated regularly as well. So DTP and CDT websites are great, but I'd also like to say it's a great idea as well to go find a supervisor, talk to them, because I did get offered another opportunity at Bristol, which was, I found that one through speaking to a supervisor and putting a project forward myself. So there's definitely opportunities there. Just because a PhD isn't advertised doesn't mean that you can't do it.
That's great, thank you. Asking a slightly different question to you, Sophie, when do you think you would apply for a PhD? Is there a specific time of year or specific?
Yeah, so, well, when I applied for mine, I was actually when I found it, I was right towards the end of when mine was sort of being advertised. I think I had about 3 weeks to sort of get my application and do everything, talk to my supervisor and get the application in. And that was in the January. So with the Sense CDT, the applications sort of close end of January. So it's definitely, I think it's never too early to start looking for a PhD. There's all different places have different application timelines. And I think, I went from my PhD from my undergrad, and I think I started looking sort of just during sort of first, second, third year, just to see what's available, what kind of things, what do I like the look of. But I did leave mine sort of like when I just happened to see it on Twitter, one of my lecturers shared it on Twitter. And then I was like, oh, that's perfect, that looks amazing. And then jumped straight in to get references sorted.
Can I throw a question out to the whole panel? Did anyone find that social media was a really good way specifically of looking for PhDs, or was it more website inclined? Was there a specific place you went to and saw more PhDs than another place, if that makes sense?
I've heard about Twitter quite frequently. I haven't used it. I'm just getting started with Twitter myself, but I've heard about it a lot.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I did a master's in glaciology before I started my PhD, and I followed a lot of people on Twitter. So I see more so now, maybe not as much 2 years ago. There's a lot of PhDs advertised on Twitter. Well, it's also on the website as well. So it's always good to check Twitter. And I think a lot of, they often get retweeted a lot by senior academics as well. So if you follow a few people like that in the field that you're interested in, it might also throw out some opportunities for you.
Great, thank you. Lucy, sorry.
I'd also just say that I found my PhD through just chatting to my previous supervisor. So she kept her ears open for me and just emailed me opportunities that she came across. So even if you don't necessarily want to do a PhD with the same undergrad or master's supervisor, they're very good at finding you opportunities that you might be interested in as well.
That's brilliant, thank you. Anthony, could I ask you what the general PhD application process components are?
The way that I did it through Find a PhD You have to like write up a kind of like a personal statement-y kind of thing and submit that online, usually with your standard CV stuff as well. In addition to that, some processes look for extra like what research did you do and how did that inform it as well. For my specific process, I don't know if this is necessarily universal, that I then had to do an online form for the university, and then further on through the DTP program there was the interviews and stuff as well. So
that's great, thank you. Amethyst, could I ask you, do you think there's anything that you would specifically add to a personal statement, any tips or tricks that might help someone stand out in the PhD application process?
I think a big thing to kind of show off is that you've got resilience in your research, because it is such a vital part of doing a PhD. You're going to have ups and downs and failures, and you're going to have to try and pick yourself back up. And I think that's a really key value that people look for when recruiting PhD students, is the ability to kind of keep going. If something knocks you back, just keep going. So I think if you can kind of exemplify that in your personal statement, I think that's a really strong quality to show.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Dorothea, would you add anything else to personal statement that would make you stand out?
Yeah, maybe I can just add something to the previous speaker, because I did not mention it in my personal statement, but the resilience of maybe even trying again for a PhD if you've applied already in a previous year, a previous round, that is actually something very valuable. So I applied in a year earlier, didn't get the PhD that I wanted, but retried, and that actually might have benefited my application the second try. So that just to the previous statement, but something that might have helped me stand out during my application process was that I knew the methods that I was working with and am working with now. Having designed the project myself is definitely something that helped, and obviously knowing the methods is a big part of that.
That's brilliant, thank you. Sophie, some people have said, obviously you put a lot into your CV, into your personal statement. What is it likely that you'll actually even be asked in the interview? Because you put out so much information to start with. What will come up in the interview?
In my interview, I got asked to explain sort of the project I was applying for in my own sort of way, because the panelists, and I'm not sure it's the same for everybody, but the panelists aren't sort of my supervisor, they aren't the experts in my project. And I think it's quite valuable to show how passionate you are about this, because a PhD is sort of it's a long haul to try and get it done. And I think you've got to be able to, one, be passionate about the topic and know a little bit. You don't need to know everything, but just maybe have read a few papers around there, know who the key people in that field already are and what they're publishing, and maybe what you'd like to add to that project as well. Maybe there's something new you've read about that would be good to try, or another kind of method you've wanted to try. Also, I think I was asked about my previous experience and how that would relate to my project. And we also got asked some sort of some questions just to see how we'd react. So we got asked, sort of given a piece of code and sort of asked to interpret it. And obviously that's just dependent on my CDT is very much remote sensing based, and that's what I'd be doing. So it'd be very different depending what topic you are. But yeah, we got asked some sort of interactive questions, and yeah.
That's great, thank you. Heather, I know you went through a different process to Sophie. Was your interview very similar to that, or was there different questions that popped up?
I think it was pretty similar. definitely can you tell me about this project in your own words? Always comes up, and why you're interested in it, which is often quite a hard question to answer in the interview, but it's good to be prepared for that one. Other than that, it was a lot of discussion about where I saw the PhD going and what my ideas were. And you're not stuck with those ideas for the next 3.5, 4 years, don't worry. But that's what your PhD is for, figuring out what you're going to do with it. But it's a good idea, like Sophie said, to have a bit of background reading in there, maybe have a recent big paper that came out in your mind so you can show that you're interested in it and you've engaged with some of the literature. But I think the major thing for me was showing my enthusiasm for my topic. I think that's really what they're looking for.
That's great, thank you. Anthony, was your process quite similar in the interview? Were you asked quite similar questions as well?
Yes, though we had 3 interviews on the one day. The actual panels themselves were specific to specific things. So one of the panels was about your project and asked the general your project questions. But one of the panels focused more on your ability to be a PhD student. So like, how well do you deal with problems and as they arise and that kind of stuff. But yeah, broadly speaking, the questions were very similar.
That's great, thank you. Lucy, one of the questions that has come in is, what experience and qualifications do you actually need to do a PhD?
Okay, so when a lot of PhDs are advertised, they will say that you kind of need a bachelor's level qualification, and that's obviously definitely the main thing. It's quite often advantageous to have a master's degree, but I'd say that that's not essential, and I think that there's a increasing push towards making sure that it's not essential in order to make PhDs more accessible to different people. So I think if you don't have a master's, you need to be really focused on what skills you've gained during your bachelor's and what other skills you've got which are relevant to doing a PhD, which maybe are not necessarily you've not got through a master's. So for example, you can meet deadlines, you can work independently, and you definitely learn these things just doing a bachelor's degree. For example, your dissertation, you've probably done most of that yourself, and you've been learning to meet deadlines and do presentations and that kind of thing. So I think there's not really a specific answer, and it's definitely very specific to each PhD. But I think you just need to be very aware of what your skills are and try and fit them to that project.
Can I ask each panelist, what was the most important skill you think you put in your CV or personal statement, which was really picked up by the panel which we're interviewing or by your supervisors? Can I ask the Amethyst first, please?
Yeah, so in my previous research, I'd done a lot of coding, which was all self-taught, and I'd taught myself a couple of different languages, so mainly Python and R. But I also looked at the PhD specification, and I'd had experience in coding some of the specific things that were relevant to my project. So I had experience with weather data, and I think and using supercomputers as well, and I think that really helped my application.
Brilliant, yeah, thank you. Heather?
Yep, I think a lot of it was to do with my GIS skills, so mapping skills, because I'd done that for my undergrad and then my master's dissertation, and the fact I was comfortable using big data sets and a variety of data sets. So I think those kind of skills, and I had a bit of theoretical knowledge behind the background of my satellite that I'm using and things like that. So I think it was the technical stuff, perhaps. Yeah.
Dorothy?
I think one of the major aspects of my application were the collaboration that I would initiate as part of my PhD. wanting to collaborate with the Alfred Wegener Institute, which is a new collaboration in that specific aspect. So that's definitely something the Institute and the university benefit from. And I think that's something to point out, that you actually bring something new to the department or your team, because you've done work before and you will bring and add value to the field. I mean, that's what a PhD is about, but it's also something you can become self-confident about during your application already. And I think if you can show some papers, or if it's just one or an abstract or a poster that you presented on a conference, that's definitely beneficial as well.
That's brilliant, thank you. Anthony?
I think for me, a softer skill was the thing that I pushed hardest and I think helped the most, which was forward planning. So the way that I went into the process was to plan for several years to get into a PhD throughout my undergrad, and I played quite heavily on that in my application, which seemed to, I've been told, was quite a big factor in my appointment.
That's great, thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, I also kind of agree with Anthony. So I don't necessarily have as many of the skills for my PhD because my PhD is very focused on remote sensing, which I've never done before. So I didn't have so many of the technical skills, but I had, I guess, put myself out there during my previous work to come design my own research a bit more. And I think that was very beneficial for me. So my master's dissertation was not one that my supervisor or anybody came up with. I completely designed it from scratch. So I've had a bit of experience with that, which I think was the main thing for me.
Fantastic, thank you. And Sophie?
So for mine, I think it was because I don't have a master's degree, so I went straight from undergrad. But in my undergrad dissertation, I sort of went outside the box with my project to add in extra methods that would make my data sort of more rounded, and then I could try and publish it, to try and publish early on. I think what my supervisor said was me taking the initiative to ground truth data during the undergrad dissertation was quite an attractive feature, I think.
Great, thank you. Anthony, could I ask you, do you think it's important that you contact your supervisor before applying for the project?
Yes, definitely. You need to know if the project is suitable for you, and the only way to do that is to talk to the person who's offering the project.
Great, thank you. Amethyst, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's really important not only to open dialogue, but kind of say, is it okay if I speak to you, maybe some current PhD students and people who have experience in your research group, to kind of get a better feel of the environment, because it varies quite a lot from university to university. So some departments are huge and you might feel better in a bigger one, or even you might prefer a smaller one. So it's really important to kind of get that communication open and see where it leads.
That's brilliant, thank you. Heather, what would you suggest people do before applying for a PhD?
Consider whether you really, really want to do a PhD. After I finished my master's, I just finished my massive dissertation and I was like, I'm done for now. I took 6 months out and did some temp work, and in that time I was like, okay, I'm not done with research, I'm still really curious, I still want to build these skills. And then I applied again. And I think it's really important you go into your PhD, go for a PhD for the right reasons. It's not going to be the same as your undergrad or master's degree. It's a lot more self-led and it's a lot more independent. But I think the key thing is the relationship with your supervisor. Not every supervisor will be great for every PhD student. Some students prefer like more regular interaction. Some students prefer to be see more infrequently and be a bit more independent, and it really depends on you. So I think it's a good idea to take time to think about how you want your PhD to be and what you want your relationship with your supervisor to be with, And as Amethyst said, it's a really good idea to talk to the other PhD students in their research group, in their department, who they already supervise, so you can kind of get an idea of the dynamics and if you think that's going to be a good fit for you, because it's you and your supervisor getting through this PhD. So it's really vital you find one that you get on with.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Dorothea, is there anything else you would do before applying for a PhD?
I think internships are always helpful. It's an opportunity to get a feeling for the field. What is the work actually like? For me, for example, it's a lot of work in the cold lab, minus 25 degrees Celsius. And if you don't like it, that's definitely something to know before a PhD. It's maybe even something that you need to take care of physically if you're not capable of experiencing the cold. Yeah, that's definitely a key. And if you like it, if you like the entire subject, the process of writing a paper, maybe. So really, it's a probing process, and the more internships you can do in various aspects of the field, the more of a round picture you probably get. This is not to say that you're supposed to do internships after internships without being paid. That's definitely something to be mentioned, but yeah, they definitely help.
That's great, thank you. Lucy, we've spoken about what questions you'll be asked in an interview. What would you suggest asking the interviewer?
Okay, so I think it kind of depends on who's interviewing you, because when I was applying for PhDs this time last year, I had a couple of different types of interview. So one of them was just with the supervisor, and I think it was really beneficial to ask them kind of what their research group is like, what their supervising is like. And then on the other side, you have PhD panels or interview panels who are not necessarily who you're going to be directly working with. For example, ours was different members from the geography departments in the universities. And they probably don't have specific knowledge on your area, but you can ask them what sort of training opportunities the CDT or DTP, if that's what you're applying for, can provide, because that varies quite a lot. For example, the Sense CDT that we're on has big blocks of training, so a month at a time, and other DTPs have it more spread out over one term. So I guess I think it's quite beneficial to ask about that and make sure that you're really suited for that kind of thing. Yeah. That's
brilliant, thank you. Anthony, was there anything that you think you asked in your interview or wanted to ask, which would be a good question to bring up?
In my interviews, I only asked about the specific NERC process and the specific funding that was available for the NERC program, but yeah.
Amethyst, was there anything in your interview that you wish you'd had asked about, or you did and were really happy that you had asked?
I had an experience with a few different PhD interviews, and if it was a case where I was getting interviewed by the supervisor or something like that, I always made sure to ask, which conferences do your students normally go to? Which ones do you think would be a good fit for me? Because conferences are a really important way to engage, but it also shows that you're thinking about presenting your research and you're engaging in that area as well.
That's brilliant, thank you. Heather, is there anything you can do to have a better chance of getting a PhD position?
Yeah, I think, as Dorothea highlighted, internships are really useful. I did one after my undergrad because I just spent some time digitizing, mapping some rock glaciers for a PhD student because they didn't have time, and I got paid for that. So if you can find a paid one, go for that one. And I think just showing enthusiasm for it. So if you have got a chance to perhaps submit a poster to a conference, or perhaps not even academically. So for me, outreach was a massive thing. So that was one question that I asked in the interview. I was like, will you be happy with me really engaging with outreach and demonstrating for undergrads and things like that? And I think if you have perhaps worked on projects or engaged with that kind of thing as well, that helps. I think there's a lot, and there's lots of different paths that you can go down. So it's not necessarily one or the other. It might be a bit of everything. You might have one specific thing that you do, but I think just putting your best foot forward and make sure you tailor your letters to the project. So the exact skills, make sure you've referenced the skills that they've actually put out. And I think a lot of it stems from the contact with the supervisor before the interview as well, because they'll have an idea for the project and they're going to be the font of information that you need, because they probably know quite a lot on it already. And one thing I would say is that if you don't get a response from your first email, do email again, because they've probably just missed it. They're not trying to be rude. Maybe they are sometimes, I don't know. But a lot of the time academics do just miss that one email. So if you're interested in the project, just keep emailing.
That's great, thank you. Sophie, would you have anything to add to that? Anything that you can do to put yourself in a better position for applying?
One thing I would say is just, I think just emailing and making up contacts is so valuable, either within sort of the university or where you are now. So one thing I did with my undergrad was just made more use of lecturers' office hours. So I just drop in and say, oh, I'm looking, probably want to apply for PhDs. Like, do you know, what about your field? Because I applied for sort of a remote sensing modeling based PhD, even though my undergrad was something completely different. So I knew I wanted to branch out, and so I talked to lecturers who were in remote sensing. Oh, what do you suggest I should read? Who to contact? And then emailing, I think, is quite vital. You don't always get a response, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they recommend papers or recommend projects. They even recommend internships. So
that's brilliant, thank you. Anthony, can I ask you, can you apply for a PhD when you've only got a bachelor's and not a master's?
Definitely. So, I mean, I had a master's degree when I applied, an undergraduate master's, but of the 4 PhD students in my lab and a postdoc, I think 3 of the 5 of us don't have master's degrees. So definitely you can.
That's brilliant, thank you. Dorothea, could I ask you, how did you know the university you chose was the right one for you?
I must say that I've never thought of me applying to the University of Cambridge. That was never the dream. But I think that was actually beneficial. It helped me to evaluate the project, the specific project, the supervisor. And I'm definitely a pro-con kind of person, so that I did make a table of the criteria that I found important. For me, that's maybe also about the circumstances. What's the grad teaching like? What's the town like? For example, I really enjoy cycling to work, and that's probably not possible at every university. Those circumstances did play a role, but of course it was about the university and the excellence that is available here as well. So really have a look at what is relevant to you, and maybe those are not only university specific criteria, but also about the environment and the life you want to have during a PhD. Because you're not only a researcher, you are definitely one, but you're not only that, you're a holistic person.
Sophie, could I ask you the same question too, please?
Yes, I do think location is a really big thing. Like, you've got 3 to 4 years of your next life is where you're going to be living, and that definitely played a big role for me. as well as, I think it was mainly supervisor actually, which helped me choose sort of which opportunity to go for. I built up quite a good conversation with the supervisor beforehand, both before the interview and then after as well. I think that helped me choose between some opportunities, was knowing, okay, I'm going to be well supported at this university. They've got a lot of, and I was also then, because I'm a University of Leeds, I'm also then based in Liverpool at the National Oceanography Centre, and that was quite a big thing as well, was I'm also affiliated with this sort of really good UK institution, as well as the CDT and the University of Leeds. So I've got these 3 institutions that can provide support and guidance with all the other PhD students at all 3 institutions.
That's great, thank you. Lucy, could I also ask you the question?
Yeah, so I guess I would echo those kind of 2 strands. So for me, I decided I was only going to apply for PhDs in places that I would like to live in. So I think I personally am not really a city person. I like being out in the countryside, so I applied for small places. For example, London was completely off my list. I didn't even bother looking. And then the second strand was definitely, again, the supervisor. I made sure that I got on well with my supervisor. And after being offered the position, I actually came to Edinburgh to meet him in person. This was just the week before COVID went crazy. So I was quite lucky. But yeah, at least trying to arrange a phone call or a video call so you've spoken to them in person before you make the leap and decide to accept, I would say.
That's brilliant, thank you. Anthony, could I ask you the same question too?
Location was down the list of priority when I was applying. It wasn't a non-priority. I similarly did not want to work in London, and I wouldn't have gone to the the Falmouth campus in Exeter University. But ultimately, I went for project and supervisor first, and happened, okay, Leeds is a nice city. Most cities are cities. It was not really a particularly important factor for me.
That's brilliant, thank you. Heather, the same question?
Yep, definitely. So when I was applying and going to interviews, it was when you could still go and visit and see places, and that was important to me. I had moved about 3 hours from home for my undergrad. I then moved in a circle up to Aberystwyth, which is also about 4 hours from my house back home. And now I'm in Leeds, which is now 4.5 hours. So I've moved around the country a bit. So I was okay with going wherever. I'm not a city lover. I lived in small towns, in small university towns. But I live just outside of Leeds, in a nice bit called Headingley, if anyone's coming to the University of Leeds. And there's a lot of greenery around, and also you've got like the Yorkshire Dales and stuff. So that kind of bit where I can get out and get some fresh air is important to me. In the scheme of things, it was probably quite low down the list, like Anthony. It was more the supervisor and the project, because that's what I was going to be working on for ages. And I knew that as long as I was okay with a little bit of a commute, so I could live that a little bit out of the city, then yeah. So I think it's important to get your priorities in your mind, what suits you, because if it is the location and not living in the city, then it's really important that you don't accept a position in a city where you're not going to be happy for 3.5 years, because it is a long time, and you don't want to be grinning and bearing living somewhere that you hate in that time. So yeah, I think a lot of when you're deciding on a PhD is self-reflection of what you want, which is really hard, and like we all sympathize with that. We all know what you're going through now anyway.
That's fantastic, thank you. Amethyst, again, how did you choose the university for you?
So, like Heather said, it was it's at the top is the project and the supervisor. But I did find that I'd applied to a few different unis, and when I was getting through the application stage, the interviews and all that, I was starting to think, oh, I really don't want to live in London, or I really don't want to live in Bristol. So I had those options open, and I was kind of thinking, if I don't get an opportunity at Leeds or Nottingham, where I also applied, would I be happy to move to London or Bristol? The answer ultimately was no. And that was just based on the city. So I thought, although I'd applied for those projects, it got to that point where I was kind of regretting applying because I knew I wouldn't be happy there. But again, like I said earlier, it's really important to look around the department because they are vastly different between universities. I looked at Manchester, where I did my undergrad, was really different to University of Leeds atmospheric department, which was different to Birmingham, which was different to Nottingham. So it's really about finding a city that you'll enjoy living in, but also the department and the project. So they all kind of link together.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to go back to Heather and ask, what do you think the best way to contact your PhD supervisor prior to application is?
Email, definitely, but if you don't get a response, then it's worth being brave and trying to pick up the phone. Like, we all hate it nowadays, I know, but it's worth it, because if that's the project that you really want and they're just missing your emails, quite often they'll reply, and it's really good to put some questions in your first email, like do a couple of sentences introducing yourself, saying I'm interested in this, and then put a couple of questions so then you can have a bit of a dialogue. And usually they'll offer, or you can ask to have like a Zoom or a Skype or a chat on the phone, and usually it's pretty informal, but it's just so you can get to know each other, and it's even more difficult now in these times than it was when I applied, unfortunately. But I think communication is key, and I think the fear of emailing a professor, you don't want that to be the thing that meant that you didn't do the PhD that you wanted at all.
That's brilliant, thank you. So going from that question, Dorothea, what do you think are good questions to ask your supervisor before you apply about the PhD?
So asking my supervisor, I think it's definitely one of the keys, is how you can make the project your project. If they have any recommendations, that's also something I asked the panel of the interview, but that's maybe even more, that's even better to ask your supervisor, because they have an idea for the project, but you have ideas for the project as well. And bringing them together might be really beneficial. So it might actually get you to the next level when in the communication with the supervisor, but also contextual. So designing and personalizing the approach to the PhD.
That's great, thank you. Sophie, are there any other questions you might ask the supervisor?
One thing I would ask, and I did as well, was what experience does your supervisor have that's sort of relevant to the project? Because I know if you probably won't have all the experience related to it. There'll probably be some areas you'll need a bit of training or help in, and it'd be nice to see where your gaps and if they line up with the expertise of your supervisor. And I know with my I didn't have just the one, I've got like a supervisory team. I've got a few others dotted around as part of with Sense as well. And where my supervisor may lack knowledge as well, I've got sort of another supervisor in the other areas. So it's how the whole team could kind of support this one project.
That's brilliant, thank you. Lucy, can I ask, how quickly should I apply for a PhD when it becomes available?
I personally would not worry about applying too quickly. I think I applied to my PhDs maybe sending in the final application 1 or 2 days before the deadline, because it meant that I had a month or two to try and chat to the supervisor and make sure my application was really strong and I was really happy with it. So yeah, I think take your time, they're not going to start looking at applications until the deadline, so you don't really need to worry about it. And I think one also thing to note with several of my deadlines were right at the beginning of January, and I had to get paperwork from my previous university, and Christmas got in the way. So just keep an eye on the fact that universities close over Christmas, and you want references from supervisors. And also I had to get transcript information because I hadn't finished my master's, so I needed an interim transcript. And I had to get that from admin offices, which had different closing times from the research parts of the university. So just keep that in mind and don't try and leave that too late, because that was very stressful when I got it a bit wrong last year.
That's great, thank you. I will just add in here that Sense CDT and Panorama DTP don't consider applications until after the deadline. So for some partnerships, you don't have to apply as soon as it comes on the market. They do wait for the closed doors, but if it's a private one, it may work different. Can I also ask, the questions come in from the panel, Heather. So they say a big part of PhD is whether your supervisor is nice, whether you get on with them. How can you grasp this idea when you actually go meet your supervisor? Do you speak to other PhD students, or do you maybe take it from how you feel about the supervisor?
So I think chatting with them, you'll feel whether you feel comfortable. You'll obviously feel, well, I felt very nervous because it was a big decision and it was scary. But yeah, it's definitely a big red flag if they don't let you meet the other PhD students, if they don't offer for you to go meet the PhD students or see your potential office and that kind of thing, and dedicate some time to you. Yeah, I personally think it comes from the research group and the students. And all academics have like a website on their university page, and it has who they supervise. So it's also a good idea to go look at the students that they supervised and see whether they've supervised a lot of people or not. It's not necessarily a deficit if they haven't. I was my primary supervisor's first primary supervising mentee. I don't know. So it's a good idea to go look at that. Yeah, I mean, we in our group always go for a coffee or a cup of tea with the new people. It's obviously different in COVID times, so I don't know what it would be like at the time, but definitely if they don't offer it, it's worth asking, because it might just have slipped their mind. But that's something that you really want to push for, meeting the other PhD students and who you're actually going to sit next to for the next 3.5 years, who you're going to get help from, basically.
Brilliant, thank you. Anthony, can I ask, is a PhD 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, in your office space, or is it more flexible and you organise your own hours?
For me, it's very flexible, but it really depends on the supervisor, I think. Some supervisors prefer a 9 to 5 office work, though obviously that's tricky to manage in COVID times. But certainly for my supervisor has a, if you get the work done, I don't really care when you're in, just make sure where we can communicate when we need to communicate, kind of jazz.
That's great, thank you. Amethyst, we've had a question come in from the panel. The person has some interviews tomorrow and wondered how to maximise their chances in the interviews.
That's really difficult. I think you just have to kind of draw on your application, kind of reflect on it, see your main things that you were trying to kind of put across, like maybe it's resilience or time management, research skills. Make sure you read up on the project beforehand, because I know I went to a PhD interview and then I got to the interview and I realized I didn't actually really know what the project was about. So that was a big downfall. So make sure you read up on it before you go in. If possible, kind of look at the news as well and see if there's anything interesting in there, because that was brought up at my interview, just to make sure you're checking on current affairs. And also have a look at recent papers as well, just to make sure you're up to date and you've got, the basics of the project, the basic processes that you're going to be looking at. just so you can kind of relay it back, because as Anthony said and a few others, that when you get to your interview, they might ask you to relay what the project is about in your own words. So you really need to be able to practice that and make sure you know it kind of top to bottom.
That's great, thank you. Sophie, someone is asking what the most important things to put on your CV when emailing your supervisors are. Is there anything specific that jumps out to you?
Yeah, so I guess if you haven't done so already, is you have like sort of a separate research CV compared to another CV you had when you were applying for sort of either part-time jobs during your courses. And that can take a little bit of time to sort of get right for you. And maybe have a look at examples in your field online. There's plenty of examples, templates on there. For mine, I wrote down what my dissertation, like just a little blurb about what I was doing in my dissertation, key methods or data I was using. And then list of experience I had in like just different technologies or anything. So I was doing physical oceanography, so anything I did through my undergrad I listed. And yes, it's very key to have a very research orientated one. And you can even have CVs that are tailored to different projects as well. So you can, omit a few things that are not unnecessary to save space. And maybe if you're sending it out to people by email, I'd probably say keep it to sort of one page, very key things. You don't want to, everyone's sort of busy. You don't want to take up too much time, but you also want to get the most out of the email and their response.
That's great, thank you. Dorothea, someone has asked, how much depth should a research proposal be in, and how should their motivation letter be structured to get into a supervisor-led competition?
So to the first letter, I would say that it should contain your experience, especially tailored to the project. It does not help if you have got research experience that is maybe entirely off topic, that might lead to the supervisors thinking, well, is that actually the application for us or for this project? That can cast doubt on it, but really try to make clear why this is related to the project. Then your motivation, Heather said that previously, and I just want to emphasize that if you're passionate, they should be able to read it. They should be able to feel it when they see the blank words. And why it's this institution, or focusing on that as well. That's at least something I felt was important here at Cambridge, because there's so many applications, and they will or might ask you the question, why should we choose you? And being self-confident, but also having the humility to say, I want to learn from you, that can be a plus as well. And can you repeat the other question as well?
How much depth should a research proposal be in?
I think that might depend on your experience. I was able to give a bit of a time schedule because I knew some of the approaches and knew that 3D CT measurements would take that long, and chemical analysis would be another core component that I should calculate certain months on. So if you have a feeling for the methods, that can be more detailed, but if you've just got a rough structure from, well, I need to do that first, characterizing melt layers, then going to the effects of that, and what do I want to do with it, that's probably enough for first try, because you show that you're able to develop a research project rather than that project specifically. That, I mean, depends on your experience, but the more tailored it is, the better, of course.
That's brilliant, thank you. Heather, I have another question for you. Someone in the audience is currently doing their masters, and they're just wondering if there's any advice, if it's common to start your PhD straight after uni, after you finish your masters.
It's really varied. I think quite a few people do go straight from the masters. I personally didn't. I took 6 months, but I have friends who took years out and went and did some went into the real world and did some experience there and had relevant skills to them. Then they came back and did it. You may know now that that's exactly what you want to do and you want to have a career in academia and you want to follow that path, and that's completely fine and it's great. Apply, go for it. But if you're not certain and you're not sure, it's worth taking a little bit of time. Projects do come up throughout the year. The bulk of the projects come up now and the deadline's in January, but independently funded projects where the money is already there and you just have to get the position come out all the time. I think my one, because I did lots of applications in the December for the January, but then this project that I'm actually doing, I think I applied mid-February and then had an interview in March. So it was a bit delayed, and then I actually started in June before everyone else started in September. So there are projects coming out here and then, and I don't think having a year out in industry is going to damage your chances or anything. I think if anything, it shows that you really want to do this because you're leaving a stable job, perhaps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The next question I'm going to ask for a few people because I should think this varies quite a lot between different training programs. But Amethyst first, how long was your interview overall?
I think we had 3 interviews in one day. I think it was 3 interviews of 15 minutes. So they were quite short, but I think it's better to go through 3 shorter interviews than one horrible long one. So, but I have had a varying experience between different unis. Some would just want one short 15-minute interview and that's all. So it really varies, but for the Panorama DTP, it was 3 15-minute ones.
That's great, thank you. Did it vary at all for C-cleared DTP, Dorothea?
Yeah, it did. We had one interview for the PhD itself that was 20 minutes, so very brief. And it was even shortened in some way because we had to give a 5-minute presentation at the start of it about the project and how we want to approach it. This might sound scary at first, but it's actually a chance for you to show what you bring and what your attitude is, what your experience is, and it even gets you settled into the interview mode. You can gain confidence by showing something that you have prepared. You're familiar with the questions you bring up through your presentation, and you can even put in some hints that people will refer to. So I think that might be something that differs to the Sense DTP then.
Sophie, in the Sense CDT, did that differ at all?
The length was similar to Dorothea's, minus we didn't have to do sort of a formal presentation. We just had to give a sort of our project in our own words. But it was roughly around 20 minutes, just the one interview. But it was sort of a whole day thing as well. We got to meet other students, the potential students as well beforehand. And there was tours given on by current PhD students around the Leeds campus, which was nice. Got to talk to other PhD students, see how they're finding it, see what their work-life balance is like, and all those questions you might not ask formally to PhD students in your lab or anything over email. And yeah, it was just nice to sort of talk to her. When I got to meet Ruth this year today, she's the Sense manager, I got to meet her sort of informally as well, and just answer any questions we had about the Sense CDT.
Great, thank you. And Heather, did it vary at all for yourself?
Similar, 30 minutes. I did have an interview. I had to give a presentation similar to Dorothea. I found that one easier, I think, because you knew what you were talking about. I think I had technical issues as well halfway through, so I just laughed it off and that got rid of the nerves. But yeah, in the interview for this PhD, I think it was about 30 minutes. And a lot of it, to be honest, towards the end was just chatting about the project and being excited about science. So don't be I hope that you're not too nervous, because I was really nervous, that you don't get to show how much you love and how much you're interested in something. So, I mean, I always take like a deep breath at the start. Like, it's going to be nervous, you'll probably say something, and it's fine not to know everything, by the way, because you're supposed to learn it in your PhD. So give an answer and say, that's something I'm really interested to learn and research further. Or if you have no clue, that's fine. Like, PhDs are for learning. You're not going to know it when you start. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do some research beforehand. But yeah, it's okay not to know everything.
Brilliant, thank you. Anthony, a slightly different question for yourself. What specifically should you include in your cover letter?
Your interest, I think, is probably an important thing to go in there. And why you want to, so that's not just your interest in the sense of like you're interested in the specific project that you're applying to or whatever, but also like why do you want to be a PhD student? Why do you want to go into further education? What's your plan afterwards? Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing. If you can squeeze some previous experience in there, it's never a bad thing. But I think mostly it's why you want to do it. You want to convince the person that you're appropriate for the position.
Great, thank you. Heather, I'm going to ask this next question to yourself because you've been in the School of Earth and Environment at Leeds prior to COVID and after COVID, and someone is asking what the department culture is like in the School of Earth and Environment in Leeds. Is it super work orientated or is it a good work-life balance?
It's completely up to you. Is the answer. There's lots of socials, so we have our own research groups within it. I mean, I have coffee mornings where we do baking, usually based off Bake Off Bakes the week before, which is always disastrous. We have regular meetings weekly. There's also social groups. Beforehand, obviously, you would go out for coffee and walk to the shop and have a break. And if someone's having a bad day, we'd all go for a walk and just have a chat so that, you know, you have a break to your day. At the moment, it's a bit more restricted because obviously we're all working from home. So in my group, we have regular meetings and check in that everyone's all right. And you don't, but also if you're not a social butterfly, perhaps, you don't have to. You don't have to engage with the social groups. You'll have your supervisor. Is really the thing that I feel most worst about for the PhDs that have started this year is you don't have that office group of people. I know you've got the people that you started with. I hope that you've had coffee mornings with them and got to meet who you would be with in the office. But I think as we're all learning how to work like this, we're all getting better at communicating through a screen. And yeah, and it really depends on like the department. So I'm Earth and Environment, but I'm also Centre for Polar Observation and Modelling. So I have a small group in there who I'm really close with. I'm in the wider group of ICAS, who I go to seminars with and other things. So you'll find with anything, you'll find your place and where you sit and who you want to chat with. I don't know if Amethyst has a different experience of the social side of things starting at Leeds this year.
Yeah, I think it's been quite difficult, especially at first, to kind of meet other people in the cohort. So we've had to kind of come together ourselves, and then we were brought together by different training events. But we keep connected with a WhatsApp group as well, just of first years across a few different unis as well, just first year PhDs in earth sciences. But then, like Heather said, I'm still connected with ICAS, where we go to seminars, the Met Office groups as well, which also hold seminars. There's coffee mornings, and I meet up with my research group on Fridays, and then a smaller research group on Thursdays. So I kind of have all of the social structure, but I would say like Heather said, not being able to be in an office with people is quite difficult, because if you've got a question about something, you have to email them and then you have to wait. Whereas in an office, you could just turn around. But hopefully, that'll be different by the time most of you start your PhDs, and we'll be back in the office.
That's great, thank you both. Lucy, could I ask you, where can you find research internships or work experience opportunities?
I think maybe a good place to start is your supervisor in your current university, if you're still at uni. Yeah, they probably have a very good idea of what's going on in that general area. And they also, you know, they will have met people who are now working in slightly different research areas. So they'll have lots of contacts that you can sort of use them as a source of information for people to contact, basically. And other than that, probably the internet, just spend a few hours Googling and allocate a period of time to looking into that, because it can be easily swept under the carpet. So maybe just allocate an afternoon or something to spend some time on it.
That's great, thank you, Lucy. Sophie, what would your advice be for anyone wanting to move to a new field for their PhD?
I would just try and talk to someone, either like another PhD student or an academic in that area, either for advice, because each field is probably got multiple different disciplines within them. You know, the topic of just remote sensing itself has got many different fields within it. Maybe look at just places to start looking at, maybe some online lectures just to briefly look into and see whether that still interests you. And then, yeah, talking to other PhD students, just seeing what they see what their research is like, see what their day-to-day is like, or what data they use, what programs they use. Like I used a coding program in my undergrad called MATLAB, and then now I think when I go into a PhD, it's more of a shift to Python. So that'll be something I'll be learning over the course of the PhD, and that might be something to consider. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Amethyst, do you think if you don't have any experience in modelling, is there still a chance you can get a PhD in modelling?
Yeah, definitely. So I have kind of some experience in this, in that while I do weather data, all of my previous experience has been analysing data that's already there, that's an output. And my PhD relates directly to the Met Office model. So I'll have to run my own model runs of certain storms, and I've got no experience running models. So they kind of give you a complete kind of course on how to run the models, how to design the models and all of that. Depending on kind of which sector of earth science you're doing, will have different models. So usually there's like little training courses you can do. I know there is for the Met Office, but for simpler models, it's much easier to just kind of, some PhD students that are already there might have made models that you can look at, adapt, kind of work from. So I don't think you need any experience at all in modeling to get a PhD in it.
Great, thank you. The next question is for both Sophie and Lucy. As the Sense CDT is moving through the same time in a cohort, do you tend to support each other or stay in contact throughout, or do you rely more on your department or supervisor?
So I guess we have just a couple of weeks ago finished our first big training block with the rest of the Sense students. So we kept in quite close contact during that. And I guess when we're not doing that, I probably am a bit closer with people in my research group. Yeah, so I guess it kind of varies over time. But yeah, if some of us need some help with something that one of the other sense students would be useful for, we all like chat a little bit. So yeah, I don't know if Sophie has anything else to add.
Yeah, I'd probably say the same. Like, we've got a WhatsApp group that so everyone's always accessible, and we kind of had lots of introductories sort of at the beginning, or obviously remotely. So we all know everyone's sort of backgrounds and what they're more comfortable with. So if, say, we're about to start a new thing we've never done before, and we're like, oh, we don't really know what I'm doing at all, we put in the group chat. So that's quite nice. But everyone's sort of remotely anyway at the minute. It's just quite nice that we can just sort of drop everyone an email if we need to. But yeah, I'm mainly sort of talking with a sort of PhD group students from NOC, but it's quite a nice mix of both.
Brilliant, thank you. How many different PhD projects should you apply for at once? Dorothea?
Not sure whether I'm a good example, but I just went for one because I really felt like this is what I've designed and I'm passionate about this one. I'm most educated in this field, so I went for just one project at a time. I applied for 2 other projects in between the one I designed myself, so it's not that I stayed too focused on that one, because it can be a challenge if you find something that's really interesting to stay in that box. But I really can encourage you to think outside the box. For me, I was lucky and I finally got that project that I designed myself. But so it depends on you, how broad your interests are, how willing you are to learn something outside of your previous expertise, and obviously on the university process, because at the University of Cambridge and the C-Clear DTP, you can apply for several projects at once, and the amount of effort you have to put in for applying for several projects at the same time is relatively low. While that may differ if you're applying to various DTPs and various universities, I think that might be something to keep an eye on.
Brilliant, thank you. Anthony, can I ask you the same question? How many PhD projects would you suggest people to apply for?
I think it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string kind of question, because so I applied for 4, but that was because I found 4 projects that I was interested in. In the end, only one of them offered me the place, so it was good that I applied for 4. But then, had I only applied for the one that I applied for, then I would have still got the PhD. So I think it's more important that you're on a project that you enjoy than you're on a project, as is the nature of PhDs. So if you find lots that you're interested in, apply for lots. If you don't, then I would suggest not applying for just random projects.
Okay, great, thank you. I have another question. What kind of key questions should we expect in the interview? I don't think students can give details of the exact questions they were asked, but they can answer generally this question rather than maybe specific questions. And also, what is the balance between questions on the topic, past academic experience, soft skills, future career, interests, etc. Dorothy, again?
Yeah, I can answer that. I've heard about interviews where you were asked a question like, oh, if you had $1 million, what would you do with it? That's entirely off topic, obviously, but it might reveal some of your values. So I didn't get that question. Mine were by far more topic related, about the project. Why am I up to the task? Have I got the experience? And what do you know about the institute you're applying to? Having some, testing your interest in the context is probably something that is always a part of it. The motivation, I think where you see yourself in a few years is often a part of it, because it's not just about doing a PhD, this is not the goal in itself. The PhD is probably a means or a process that you will go through in order to go further. You will apply that knowledge, you will bring that to society, to economy, and you want to do something with it. So that's probably something to think about before, as I think it was Heather who said that. Do you really want to do that, and why do you want to do it? That's a key question, and if you thought about it, that's nothing to be afraid of in an interview as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Amethyst, can I ask some advice on cover letter? Someone's asking how long should it be, 1, 2 pages? Should it be broken up with subheadings? Just a sort of formatting.
So it will depend on the university. Some CDTs or DTPs will have guidelines on what you should do. But I think generally, if you keep it to about one side of A4, you don't really need headings. Just try and get down the main points. It needs to be quite short and snappy. It just needs to include the main things, why you're interested, who you are, why you want to do a PhD, and kind of very briefly, you could include what kind of experience you've got.
Great, thank you. Heather, another question for yourself. Someone has asked how we all find the time for work-life balance, and is it difficult to manage?
Yes, it is. But I think it really depends on the person. So I very much log my hours, which I recommend to people when they start, because it's really easy just to be overworking, and over time you just become fatigued and you can't produce. You'll be producing the same output in a month that you would in a week if you had given yourself time to rest. A lot of it's on your shoulders, and you can feel a pressure just from the academic environment, because everyone seems to be working all the time and juggling all these different things. But I think it's important to treat it like a job. You clock in, you clock out. You need to separate yourself from your project a bit. You can be as passionate about it as you want, but you need to make sure that it's not just, you're not your PhD, you're more than it. So that's the most important thing that you take away from this, probably. No one's going to be like, you must work a ridiculous amount of hours. Sometimes it varies, because you might go to a conference and you'll be like working all day technically, because you're talking and networking, and one of the most important things in a PhD is networking. And you've heard it from all of us that you want to talk to your supervisor at undergrad or masters, because you want them in your network still, and then you'll get more through your PhD. So it can be really tough, especially working from home as well. I rearranged my living room so that I no longer look at my desk from my sofa. That was an important thing for me to do. But I think you'll find what works for you. I personally work 9 to 5 if I can. And then if I'm having a day where I'm getting nowhere, I'm lost in code, I need a break, I take that afternoon off, and then I'll work it at a different point, because sometimes you need that. And I think it's probably the same, similar to trying to manage your time at like masters and undergrad as well. You need to make sure there's some time in there for fun.
A question which is attached to that question is also, do you get your own desk for your PhD? Can I ask that? Well, Heather, can I ask that to you? Because I know it might change between different universities.
Yeah, so we have an office, a shared office with PhD students and postdocs in. Obviously not in it at the moment. There was some allowance for home setup, because we've now been working like this since March. But in the actual university, you have an office, a desk that's assigned to you with a desktop computer, usually a laptop, that kind of thing. That's also a good question to ask. If you're going to be using a lot of computer power, check that the university and you have access to that computer power for free. Yeah, so you get a desk. You're lucky if you get a nice office with a nice view. I personally don't have a nice office with a nice view, but I have lovely people in my office, so that's fine.
That's great, thank you. Anthony, would it be difficult for an introvert person to network and communicate with supervisors during their PhD? And any suggestions on how to help that connection be made?
If you are an introverted person, like me, I'm quite an introverted person. You at some point you have to develop those networking skills because you need them for professional work, you need them for whatever. So the answer, I guess, is it can be difficult, and certainly I have to put more effort into it than some other people do. Hopefully you get on well with your supervisor, and if you do get on well with your supervisor, then you can work through them a lot of the time. But yes, if it's not something you're very good at, then I would definitely say work hard on it. Consider it an important soft skill that you need to learn over the course of your PhD, because it is such a vital skill for any profession in any context, really.
That's brilliant, thank you. Sophie, can I ask you, who would you recommend contacting for a reference? Your dissertation supervisor, a lecturer, etc.?
I think it's quite an important choice, I think, for your PhDs. You want to make sure you have people who know you well and would write a lovely reference for you. I personally had my tutor who knew me for my whole degree and my my dissertation supervisor. I knew I've met with them regularly, they know me, they know how I work, my work ethic. I think if you could do is sort of write down all these sort of traits you have that you want to convey through your reference and say, okay, well, who knows me well enough to be able to know what they are? You can just also have a discussion with them. You can talk to them, like they might say, actually, I'm not sure if I know you well enough, and maybe suggest someone else, maybe suggest another person in the department. I think you probably talk more with this person. It's a good conversation to have, I think, before, and maybe have it sort of early on, and then you can decide then, actually, maybe I should build up more of a conversation with someone. Maybe I should meet with my tutor more regularly up to the date of the references.
That's great, thank you. I've got a question for everyone. Has doing a PhD been what you expected it to be? I'll start with Amethyst.
Well, as it's relatively early in my PhD, it's quite difficult to say. But to be honest, I did expect to start in an office, so that's a big no. But apart from that, I think I've had a lot more support than I thought I would get from other PhD students and postdocs. We've got quite a tight little group and we meet quite regularly. So I didn't really expect that, but it's nice to just be able to reach out to anyone anytime you need help, and there's always someone there. So I think I didn't expect that, but it is a good thing to have.
Great, thank you. Heather?
Yeah, I'm a bit further through, so I've had the experience in the office, and it is what I expected. I expected to be working hard, and I am. And it does ebb and flow with the amount of work you have to do with deadlines and things like that. Yeah, I would echo what Amethyst said, that the support from one of the most important things I've found is the support from the postdocs and the more senior PhD students who can help you through, who can, when you're stuck and you just lost it, they'll look at it and be like, oh, it's just that because I did that like 2 years ago or something. So it's really useful. So I think that network is the best surprise thing I have.
Dorothea?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a few weeks in, but I have to say that the support network is surprisingly good given the circumstances. I was lucky enough to have weekly supervision meetings with first virtual, now even in person, and I'm allowed 2 days in the office, so that's definitely luxury at the moment because I need computing capacities, but that's not normal, I know. Something I did expect, and that has proven valuable so far, is knowing the supervisor, because the culture I'm currently experiencing is very good. The team is something I was familiar with and definitely profit from. So yeah, let's hope that it stays that way.
Sophie?
I'm just echoing what everyone else has said so far. It's just the support has been just amazing, both from PhD students in sort of my group and just my research group as a whole anyway. We sort of meet weekly. Everyone just sort of discuss what they've been doing that week, any problems, and it's just been nice seeing what everyone else has been working on. And then with like Sense as well, like during our training, it was just nice sort of working with other people. I know obviously everything's remote at the minute, but it was nice sort of remotely working with everyone. And yeah, the support has been just something you don't imagine. You expect a PhD to just be independent work, but it's sort of a group work that you do on your own. That makes sense.
Lucy?
Yeah, I guess I would also echo the same thing. I guess maybe it's not that surprising, but when I've been going to research meetings, everyone is just kind of such a font of information, and I just because I've not done research on the dry tropics before, I don't know that much about it, and it's been really lovely that the rest of the group are doing kind of similar things to me, and they're happy for me to ask them probably slightly silly questions, and they're sharing bits of code and stuff that they've learned, and yeah, it's really great.
Great. And Anthony?
So mimic, I suppose, Amethyst, I wasn't expecting to be starting my PhD in the middle of a pandemic, and so that was not something that I expected. Also, I wasn't expecting it to start quite so slowly. I don't know why I wasn't expecting it to start quite so slowly, but that's a fairly normal thing as you get to grips with the literature and that jazz. I have worked in lots of research labs before starting the PhD, so I was aware of how the lab work would go, and so that was as I was expecting it to be. But also, to echo everyone else, really, the support networks are surprisingly closer than I thought that they were going to be, which is quite encouraging. Certainly, I had heard some horror stories from different PhD students at different universities, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that they are definitely not true at University of Leeds, which is a good thing. I'm also pleasantly surprised at how well I get on with my supervisor. Not in a bad, not that I wasn't expecting to not get on well with them, but I mean, my first meeting with her ended up being a 4-hour just chat, which was really nice and not particularly expected, but in a good way.
That's great, thank you. I realise we're nearly coming to the end of the session, so I'll ask one final question to everyone, and that is, what inspired you to choose to do a PhD? I'll start with you, Amethyst.
So I did a research project from first year, just alongside my undergrad, and I took it all the way through. I'm actually still working on it now. My supervisor gives me kind of like an afternoon a week to finish my work off from that. But it was a research project that I took from start to now finish, that's going to end up in a paper. And I think just going through all of that through undergrad just showed me how much I enjoy research and all the different components. Getting into it early just gave me so much experience that I loved, and I wasn't ready to give research up yet, so I thought I'll go for PhD.
That's great, thank you. And Heather?
So I think a lot of it came from my lecturers. I had some great lecturers and I was really interested in their work and I was really interested in my field. Similar to Amethyst, my undergrad dissertation is now published, which I finished in I got published in the first year of my PhD. So I think that whole process opened my eyes to it a bit. And I think at the end of my master's, when I took a little bit of a break, the curiosity was still there. I just wasn't done. I wanted to see what else could happen because it's really cool what we all do. It's all different, but it's all really cool. And I think it's really easy to forget that when you're staring at code for however many hours a day. So I think it's the curiosity really and the love for what we're doing that made me want to do it.
Great, thank you. Dorothea?
I have to say that the most important thing was probably awe of nature. Being outside, realizing that there is so much to be in awe of, and there's so much beauty in any season, that I wanted to learn more of it, and that's probably what got the wheel rolling. And there was no way to stop it at some point. And it's definitely the aspect of responsibility for the climate system. That's probably the next level that came from the awe and knowledge during the studies, undergrad and masters, that led me to doing polar sciences, something very specific that maybe not many people think of, but these regions are so fragile and beautiful. So that's probably the combination that inspired me to do a PhD in that field.
Fantastic, thank you. Sophie?
I think similar to Dorothy, I think I just really love the ocean. You know, I've always had, and I think I just really like learning about the ocean. And I think a nice clear path for me to keep learning and keep researching was to do a PhD, so I can one day do the best research I can about the ocean.
Brilliant, thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, again, the same thing. So my undergraduate degree was in conservation biology, so I've always just loved being outside and wanted to, contribute towards conservation at the moment. And then I think the tipping point for me was my master's supervisor. She was just super passionate and like pushed me to be brave and apply for PhDs, because it's not something anyone in my family has not really been to university before, so it's not something I was really aware of. So she was, really inspired me to kind of move forward with this, which is how I've ended up here.
Great, thank you. And Anthony?
I met a bloke, a bee scientist, when I was 13 at a tent at an agricultural festival. And I've wanted to be a scientist ever since. And the way you become a scientist in my field is to do a PhD. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. I'd just like to draw everyone's attention to the feedback form, which has been dropped into the chat by Ruth. Anyone who's attended, please fill it out. We'd be really grateful for all your feedback. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to the panelists. We've now run out of time, unfortunately, so I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions, but there is also a link into the chat which will take you to the Sense CDT page and the Panorama DTP if you have any more questions. I'd like to say a big thank you to Ruth and Nigel as well for answering the Q&A as we went through. There will also be a video of this uploaded to the Sense Earth Observation CDT YouTube channel, as it has been recorded. And there will be a handout put up on the Sense CDT website later on this week as well. So thank you, huge thank you to all the panelists again, and thank you for coming. We really hope what we've covered in this will help you in your PhD application journey. Thank you.